The overarching theme running through this specific block is really the tension between what is visible and what is hidden.
Okay, yeah. Like the surface versus the foundation.
Exactly. Because when we look at a finished piece of art, or a successful career, or even just a curated digital persona, we're only seeing the surface.
We just see the shiny result.
Right. So these 10 entries, 3501 through 3510, they act as a schematic for the psychological plumbing underneath all of that. They dismantle the illusion that creativity or identity is just something you naturally are. It reframes it as something you actively, rigorously construct.
So let's get right into that construction process, because if you want to build anything, you need a foundation. And that is exactly where entry 3503 starts us off. The text states this very stark, uncompromising truth. It says, artists need a practice to fully be artists.
Which is such a direct attack on our modern obsession with identity over action.
Oh, for sure. Think about how many people adopt the aesthetic of a creative life without doing the work.
Right. They buy the vintage typewriter, they curate the perfect little studio space.
And they put writer in their social media bio.
Exactly. But entry 3503 draws a hard line here. It says the noun is entirely dependent on the verb.
The practice isn't just a thing the artist does on the side.
No, it is the fundamental mechanism that generates the artist in the first place. Without that habitual, unglamorous mechanism of actually doing the work, the identity is just a costume.
Just a costume, wow. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of that work. Like, how do you build that practice?
You need structure.
Right. And the Dynaxiom gives us that entry 2504. It talks about constraints. The text reads, using constraints in creativity are a scaffolding that only you need to see.
And then it adds that you don't always have to explain how the scaffolding was necessary, but sometimes the scaffolding is interesting in itself.
3D506 really threw me at first.
It's a tough one to swallow. The text just simply states, lyrics are dumbed-down language.
Yeah, and on its face, that sounds so dismissive of lyricists. Like, calling the work of incredible songwriters dumbed down feels almost offensive.
I know, but if we apply the mechanics of scaffolding from 3504, we actually see what the Dynaxiom is diagnosing here.
So you're saying the music itself is the constraint?
Exactly. The melody, the rhythm, the tempo, that is the scaffolding. So the language isn't being insulted, it's being compressed.
Okay, I see.
Let's look at the why behind that compression. Like, a poet writing on a physical page has the luxury of limitless space and time, right?
Right, a reader can pause, reread a dense paragraph, take their time.
But a lyricist does not have that luxury. The language is fundamentally constrained by the physical limitations of human breath.
And the rigid container of the musical measure itself.
Right. You have perhaps like 3 beats and 5 syllables to deliver a devastating emotional payload before the chord changes.
So it's kind of like the difference between packing a massive trunk for a month-long vacation versus packing a tiny backpack for a weekend survival trip. You can't take your entire nuanced philosophical vocabulary with you in the backpack. You have to discard everything except the absolute essentials.
Exactly. The language is simplified or dumbed down, not because the creator lacks intelligence, but because the melodic container demands maximum potency in minimal space.
The simplification actually proves that the constraint is working.
But that intense focus on outward projection, pushing your expression into the world through lyrics or art, it kind of forces us to look at the other side of the equation.
Right. What happens when we look at the tools we use to reflect ourselves back inward?
Which is where the Dynaxiom pivots from creative construction to psychological distortion. Let's pull up entry 3502.
This one is genuinely chilling to me.
It hits very close to home.
It does. Entry 3502 argues that giving people a mirror acts as a diversion.
Specifically, it says, especially if the mirror has the potential to make them look exactly how they want to look, and they'll keep looking at that mirror.
Yeah, and it explicitly identifies technology as this mirror. And it adds this very sharp observation. They see their own reflection, but others don't see it or refuse to look at it.
To really grasp the mechanics of 3502, we have to look at how modern algorithmic technology actually functions.
Right, because social media platforms and digital avatars, they aren't just passive reflections.
No, they are active feedback loops. They are designed to hijack human psychology. The algorithm literally learns what validates you, what aesthetics you prefer, what opinions make you feel smart.
And it aggressively feeds that exact reflection back to you.
Yes, it creates a custom-built, idealized digital mirror.
So what does this all mean for us? Are we just trapped in this massive vanity loop where everyone is staring at their own custom-built reflections, ignoring everyone else's?
That is exactly the danger 3502 is pointing out. It's the illusion of visibility.
Like, if you are sitting on your commute right now, Think about the last time you posted something you were really proud of.
You probably felt like you were broadcasting your idealized self to this huge audience.
But the mechanical reality is that everyone else in that digital space is equally mesmerized by their own custom algorithmic mirrors.
Right. They are refusing to look at your reflection because they are totally trapped in the feedback loop of their own.
We are essentially a society of individuals standing in a crowded room, but each of us is just staring into a private handheld mirror.
It creates a profound vulnerability because if your entire sense of self or your creative practice is tied to the validation of that false mirror.
You're building on sand.
Exactly. But the Dynaxiom provides the structural antidote to this in Entry 3501, which establishes the absolute necessity of conviction.
Let's bring in Entry 3501. It says, always care about what you're doing even if no one else does. If people care about it in the future, you'll know you cared at one point as a testament to sticking to your guns.
This right here is how you shatter the false mirror.
Right, because the algorithmic mirror of 3502 trains you to only care about what generates immediate, visible feedback.
And Entry 3501 demands the exact opposite mechanism. It requires you to decouple your care from external validation completely.
You have to continue the practice we discussed back in 3503.
Right, maintaining your internal scaffolding from 3504, even if the rest of the world is too busy looking at their own reflections to notice you.
Because if you only create what the mirror tells you looks good today, you're just constantly chasing a moving target designed by a machine.
And Entry 3501 points out something so vital about time. If you stick to your guns in total obscurity, and the culture eventually shifts to care about what you were doing,
your past conviction stands as a permanent testament.
Exactly. It proves that your foundation was real, not just a desperate attempt to pander to a current trend.
And chasing that immediate validation leads to a very specific psychological trap, which the Dynaxiom lays out perfectly in Entry 3505.
Don't assume that when you get what you want, that it'll be what you always wanted.
The tragedy of shifting desires. It connects so perfectly to the false mirror of technology.
It really does. We spend years staring into that algorithm, chasing this idealized reflection of what we think we want.
The perfect job title, the perfect creative milestone, the perfect house.
But the mechanical flaw in that pursuit is that humans are deeply dynamic creatures, while our goals are usually just static images.
Or the psychological reality of dopamine and motivation is that our brains are literally wired for the chase, not the acquisition.
The person you are when you set a goal is fundamentally different from the person you become by the time you achieve it.
Yeah, the struggle, the practice, the passage of time, it all alters your internal chemistry and your worldview.
So when you finally grasp the thing you thought you wanted, the desire itself is already mutated.
Which is terrifying, honestly. So if our mirrors are feeding us illusions and our own desires are constantly shifting underneath us, how do we actually move forward?
How do we navigate a life where the targets are always moving? Well, this brings us to the final and perhaps most complex arc of this 10-entry block. It deals with how we navigate time and continuous evolution.
Okay, let's introduce Entry 3507, which notably has a specific date tag of April 2026 attached to it. It reads, if your life is a flow, then you really don't need to make any choices. I have to admit, my initial reaction to this was intense skepticism.
Because it sounds almost too passive.
Yeah. It sounds like giving up your agency entirely. Like if I'm in a river raft and the river is just moving me, I don't choose the destination. I'm just a passive victim of the current.
That skepticism is entirely natural, but I think it comes from misinterpreting the mechanics of flow here. The Dynaxiom is not advocating for dead passivity.
Okay, then how should we look at it?
Let's replace the river rafting analogy with something more mechanical. Think of a gyroscope.
A gyroscope, okay.
At its core, a gyroscope is spinning fiercely. It is highly active. But because of that intense, aligned core activity, it maintains absolute stability regardless of how the environment around it tilts or shifts.
Oh, wow. I like that.
When your life is in a state of flow, you aren't avoiding action. You are so deeply aligned with your core practice that the agonizing burden of daily micro-decisions is just removed.
The actions become an inevitable extension of your alignment.
Exactly.
That makes the concept so much more actionable. The flow removes the friction. But wait, how do you maintain that spinning core while the world changes around you?
The Dynaxiom answers this immediately in the next one, Entry 3508.
Right. Staying the same for the better is perhaps better than changing for the better? This way you keep the baby and get to change the water daily.
This is such a brilliant recalibration of how we view personal growth.
It really is, because we are so culturally obsessed with reinvention.
Oh, totally. We are constantly told to disrupt ourselves, to become a completely new person every 5 years.
But Entry 3508 warns us that constantly changing your core identity is actually destructive. Let's break down the mechanics of the baby in the water here.
Go for it.
In this framework, the baby is your unchanging core. It's the gyroscope spinning. It's the conviction you established back in 3501 and the daily practice you built in 3503.
Right. You have to fiercely, stubbornly protect that core.
But the water is the external environment. It's the tools you use, the cultural context you live in, the audience you engage with.
And that water changes every single day.
Yes, so if you try to hold on to yesterday's water, say, a specific piece of outdated technology or a rigid business model.
You stagnate.
Exactly. But if you throw out the baby, if you abandon your core principles just to reinvent yourself for a new trend, you lose your entire foundation.
So if you're listening to this and thinking about your own career, you really have to ask yourself, are you constantly changing your baby to chase the latest industry buzzword?
Or are you keeping your core mission intact while just adapting to the new water of the market?
Right. Staying the same for the better means having the profound confidence to let the daily waters of change rush over you without eroding who you fundamentally are.
But maintaining that core does not mean you just avoid creative evolution entirely.
Not at all. In fact, the source material anticipates the fear that staying the same might just lead to boredom.
Which brings us to Entry 3509. Creativity should make you feel restless. It's the nature of creativity throughout a lifetime to always be changing, even in small ways, sometimes changing back to what you did decades ago, and feels like a real change, not just a nostalgia.
This explains exactly how the expression of the core evolves. The core stays the same, but the creativity pushing outward is restless.
And the concept of looping back is so fascinating to me. Returning to an old idea decades later isn't just nostalgia, it's a completely different mechanical process.
Because growth isn't a straight linear line. It operates more like a spiral staircase.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, when you return to a stylistic choice or a constraint or a philosophy you explored 20 years ago, you might be looking at the exact same coordinates on the map. But because you have lived another 20 years, because the water has changed around you thousands of times, you are standing on a higher rung of the spiral.
You are applying decades of new friction and experience to an old tool.
Exactly. It feels like a radical change because the person wielding the tool has entirely different hands now.
Wow. Which perfectly sets up the final piece of this puzzle today, Entry 3510.
The big finish.
It simply states, every day is an opportunity to define an edge. Losing your edge means you have somehow plateaued and are looking for something new.
Defining the edge is the ultimate daily requirement of the Dynaxiom.
But we have to synthesize this because looking at Entry 3508 and 3510 side by side presents a massive paradox.
Okay, how so?
Well, Entry 3508 mandates that we stay the same for the better. We have to keep the baby. But Entry 3510 warns us against plateauing, demanding that we constantly define an edge so we don't lose it.
Right.
How do you simultaneously stay exactly the same at your core while constantly pushing to define a new edge?
Well, the paradox dissolves when we understand the mechanics of what an edge actually is here.
Okay, walk me through it.
Plateauing is not the result of staying the same. Plateauing is what happens when you stop interacting with the changing water.
Oh, I see.
You plateau when you get paralyzed by the false mirror of 3502, or when you abandon your daily practice from 3503.
So the edge isn't a new identity. The edge is the friction point.
Exactly. To define an edge daily, as 3510 demands, is the active, sometimes violent process of pressing your unchanging core against the friction of today's new water.
Your core identity, the baby, the spinning gyroscope, stays exactly the same.
Yes, but your restless creativity is constantly pressing outward, defining the exact boundary where you end and the changing world begins today.
If you aren't pressing against the water, you aren't defining an edge.
You're just floating passively, and that is when you lose your edge.
The edge is the boundary between the baby and the water. That ties the entire sequence together so perfectly.
It really does. Your practice from 3503 is the constant engine.
The scaffolding from 3504 provides the architectural structure.
You ignore the algorithmic mirrors of 3502 by relying entirely on the deep conviction of 3501.
And by letting the water change daily around your fiercely protected core, you define your edge in the flow without ever stagnating.
It is an incredibly demanding but structurally sound philosophy for existing in a chaotic world.
It requires immense discipline to execute.
It demands that you actively strip away illusions, embrace tight constraints, and show up to define your edge every single day.
Completely, regardless of whether the mirrors are reflecting any applause back at you.
Exactly.
To wrap things up, if constraints are the secret architecture that builds our true creativity, as we saw in 3504, wait, let me restart that. If constraints build our true creativity, and if we must actively avoid the false static mirrors of technology to define our dynamic edge every day in 3510.
Then perhaps our ultimate unavoidable constraint is time.
Exactly. Time is the one river we are all flowing in. Time is the water that changes every single day without our permission. So as you navigate the rest of your day, ask yourself this. What invisible scaffolding are you building today in the limited time you have that your future self will look back on as a true testament to your conviction?